The alarm inside the Chorvath Council chamber cut through the air before Laura Mitchell even reached her seat. Every screen in the massive hall flickered red, and for a moment, she thought the station itself was under some kind of failure. It was not a failure. It was a warning meant for her. Laura was the lead human ambassador to the Galactic Council, a position she had held for 6 years. In that time, she had seen debates over trade routes, disputes over mining rights, and long, tiring arguments about communication protocols between species who barely understood each other. She had never seen the chamber called into emergency session with less than 1 hour of notice. She had never seen every council seat filled at once, delegates from 11 worlds sitting in complete silence, watching her walk in. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the stillness of the room, in the way the Velatari delegate refused to meet her eyes, in the way the council speaker's voice trembled slightly as he called the session to order. "Ambassador Mitchell," the speaker said, his 4 eyes scanning the chamber before settling on her, "you have been summoned to answer for irregular activity discovered within human research territory." Laura felt her pulse quicken. She kept her expression calm, the way she had trained herself to do during 100 difficult negotiations. "I was not informed of any irregular activity, Speaker. If the Council has concerns, I am ready to address them." 3 cycles ago, the Speaker continued, a Council monitoring vessel detected an energy signature near the human colony on Aldrin Reach. The signature matched no known technology within Council registry. It exceeded the output limits set by the Unified Development Accord by a factor the Council finds troubling. A murmur spread across the chamber. Laura's mind raced. She knew about Aldrin Reach. She knew about the research facility there. What she did not know was how much the Council had already learned, or how they had learned it. "The Unified Development Accord," she said carefully, "permits member species to pursue independent research, provided it does not threaten the stability of Council space." "And who," asked the Velatari delegate, finally lifting his gaze to hers, "determines what threatens stability? You? Your species has existed among the stars for 3 centuries. We have coexisted for millennia. Forgive us if we do not trust a species so young to understand the weight of its own ambition." The words hit harder than Laura expected. She had heard condescension from council members before, but never delivered with such open suspicion. She understood, in that moment, that this was no longer a conversation about one research facility. This was about humanity itself. "I would like to know," Laura said, standing straighter, "exactly what the Council intends to propose." The speaker did not answer right away. Instead, a holographic display rose from the center of the chamber floor, showing a document written in the formal script used only for binding Council resolutions. Laura's stomach tightened as she read the title glowing above the text. "Proposal for Permanent Technological Oversight of the Human Species." She read further, her eyes moving faster than her breathing. Every future human technological development, from propulsion systems to medical advancements to energy production, would require submission to a Council review board before implementation. Violations would result in immediate trade suspension. Repeated violations would result in expulsion from all shared defense networks. It was not a request, it was a leash. "This cannot be serious," Laura said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You are asking humanity to surrender its right to progress." "We are asking humanity," the speaker said calmly, "to demonstrate that it can be trusted with the power it seems so eager to chase." Laura looked around the chamber. 11 worlds. 11 species who had built their peace through careful, slow cooperation. And now, watching her with a mixture of caution and fear, as if humanity were a storm they had only just noticed forming on the horizon. "I need time," she said. "This proposal affects billions of people. It cannot be decided in this room, by this council, without a voice from Earth itself." The speaker considered this for a long moment. Around him, several delegates exchanged quiet glances, silent conversations passing between species who had negotiated together for generations. Finally, the speaker nodded. "You have 7 days, Ambassador. Return to your homeworld. Present this proposal to your leaders. On the 8th day, the Council will vote, whether your species accepts the terms or not." Laura left the chamber with her mind spinning. The walk back to the human docking bay felt longer than she remembered. the corridors of Chorvith Station suddenly feeling colder, narrower, less welcoming than they had that morning. She passed delegates from other species who once greeted her warmly. Now they looked away, or worse, watched her with open curiosity, as if she were already something different, something that needed to be observed. Aboard her transport ship, Laura sat alone in the small communication room, staring at the star field outside the window. She thought about Aldrin Reach, about the research team led by Dr. Ethan Hall, who had spent the last 3 years developing something the human government had classified under the highest possible security level. She had never seen the details herself. She only knew it was important enough that Earth's leadership had kept it hidden even from her. She opened a secure channel and waited as the connection stretched across the distance between Chorvith Station and Earth. It took several minutes before the screen finally connected, showing the tired face of Grace Lawson, the head of Earth's Global Assembly. "Laura," Grace said, her voice tight with concern, "you look like you just walked out of a funeral." "I might have," Laura replied. "The Council knows about Aldrin Reach." Grace's expression shifted instantly, the color draining slightly from her face. "How much do they know?" "Enough to draft a resolution that would put every human technological advancement under their control, permanently." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Laura could see Grace processing the weight of what she had just said, her jaw tightening, her eyes narrowing with the kind of focus Laura had seen only a handful of times before, always during moments of real crisis. "They can't do that," Grace finally said. "They can, and they will, unless we agree to their terms within 7 days. Grace, I need to know what happened at Aldrin Reach. I need to know what they found." Grace hesitated, glancing off screen for a moment, as if checking that she was truly alone. "It's not something I can explain over a channel, even a secure one. You need to come home. All of us need to be in the same room when this decision is made." Laura closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of the coming days settle onto her shoulders. 7 days to decide the future of an entire species. 7 days before the Galactic Council placed humanity under a permanent limit on how far it could reach, how much it could build, how much it could become. "I'm coming home," she said. "Get everyone ready, every faction, every leader, every voice that matters. Whatever we decide, it has to be a decision made together." She ended the connection and sat in silence, watching Chorvith Station shrink behind her ship as it pulled away. The great glowing structure that had once represented humanity's place among the stars, now feeling like the edge of a cage closing shut. For the first time in her career as an ambassador, Laura Mitchell was not sure whether she wanted to convince her people to accept the Council's terms or to walk away from the table entirely. Both paths carried a weight she could barely imagine. And somewhere behind her, on a quiet research world called Aldrin Reach, something had already changed the future in ways she did not yet understand. The ship's engines hummed steadily as it turned toward the long journey home, carrying with it not just an ambassador, but the opening move in a decision that would echo across every corner of the galaxy. Laura spent the first few hours of the journey reviewing every piece of information she had on Aldrin Reach, searching for clues in old reports, budget records, personnel lists, anything that might explain what Dr. Ethan Hall's team had built. Most of the files were locked behind clearance levels she did not have access to, a fact that frustrated her more with every attempt. She had represented humanity on the Council for 6 years, and yet here she was, locked out of the very secret that now threatened to define her species' future. She finally gave up and turned instead to the history she did know, replaying the Council's words over and over in her mind. 3 centuries among the stars. It was true. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council later than almost every other member species, arriving with technology that was, by Council standards, primitive. In the early years, humans had been welcomed with a strange mixture of curiosity and pity, treated like a promising but fragile newcomer that needed guidance. But humanity had never been comfortable staying in that position. Within a single century, human engineers had closed technological gaps that other species assumed would take 1,000 years. Human scientists solved problems that had stumped Council research teams for generations. And with every leap forward, the warmth from other species cooled a little more, replaced slowly by something closer to caution. Laura understood, in a way she had never fully admitted to herself before, that this moment had been building for a long time. The council had not called this emergency session because of a single research facility. They had called it because humanity's pace of growth had finally crossed a line that made the rest of the galaxy afraid. As her ship approached Earth's outer defense perimeter, she received a message from Grace Lawson, confirming that representatives from every major nation and faction had already begun arriving at the Global Assembly headquarters. It was, Grace noted, the fastest full gathering in the Assembly's history. Normally, coordinating a session like this took weeks of negotiation just to agree on scheduling. This time, every leader had cleared their calendar within hours of hearing the news. Laura watched Earth grow larger in the window as her ship descended through the atmosphere, the familiar blue and green world spinning slowly beneath her. She thought about the 7 days ahead, about the decision that would need to be made, and about the strange, quiet fear building steadily in her chest. Not fear of the Council's power, fear of what humanity might choose to do in response to it. Her ship landed at the Assembly's private terminal just after dawn, local time. Grace was waiting for her on the platform, along with 2 other figures Laura recognized immediately. Daniel Cole, the head of Earth's Defense Coordination Office, and Claire Dawson, the senior advisor to the Global Assembly's Science Division. Both looked as though they had not slept. "We need to talk before the full session starts," Grace said, guiding Laura quickly through the terminal. "There are things you need to know about Aldrin Reach before you sit in that room." Laura followed them through a series of secured corridors, past guards who checked her credentials twice despite clearly recognizing her, into a small briefing room deep beneath the assembly building. The door sealed shut behind them, with a heavy, final sound. Claire activated a screen at the center of the table, and an image appeared showing the research facility at Aldrin Reach, a cluster of buildings surrounded by wide, open fields under an unfamiliar sky. Laura studied it carefully, waiting for someone to explain. 3 years ago, Claire began, Dr. Hall's team was given a mandate to explore an entirely new approach to energy generation, something that didn't rely on any of the frameworks currently approved by the Council. We didn't expect them to succeed so quickly. When they did, we made the decision to keep it classified, even from the Council, until we understood exactly what we were dealing with. "And what are you dealing with?" Laura asked. Daniel exchanged a glance with Grace before answering. "A power source that could change everything. Faster travel. Cleaner energy. Technology that could put humanity a full generation ahead of every species in the Council. Possibly more." Laura felt the weight of the room shift around her. "That's why they're afraid," she said quietly. "This isn't about oversight. This is about control, before we get too far ahead to be stopped." 3. Grace nodded slowly. "The Council isn't worried about safety, Laura. They're worried about balance, about their place in a galaxy where humanity is no longer the newest, weakest member." Laura sat down heavily, processing the full shape of the crisis now laid out in front of her. 7 days to decide whether to hand over control of humanity's future, or to risk everything by refusing. Outside the briefing room, beyond the walls of the assembly building, the sun was rising fully over a world that had no idea yet how close it stood to a decision that would change its place among the stars forever. Laura took a slow breath, steadying herself for what was about to come, knowing that the coming days would ask more of her, and of every leader gathered in this building, than any negotiation she had faced before. The Global Assembly Chamber had never held so many people at once. Every seat was filled, every aisle lined with advisors and officials who had traveled through the night to be present. Laura Mitchell stood at the front of the room, looking out over faces from every corner of the world, faces that carried the same exhausted tension she felt in her own chest. Grace Lawson called the session to order, and the room fell silent almost instantly, a silence that felt heavier than any Laura had experienced in 6 years of council negotiations. 7 days ago, Grace began, the Galactic Council discovered evidence of advanced research being conducted at Aldrin Reach. They have responded by drafting a resolution that would place every human technological development under permanent council oversight. If we refuse, we risk expulsion from every shared trade and defense network we currently depend on. If we accept, we surrender our right to develop freely, forever. A wave of murmurs spread across the chamber, quickly rising into overlapping voices, questions shouted from different sections of the room. Grace raised a hand, and the noise slowly settled. "Before we debate the terms," she continued, Dr. Ethan Hall will explain exactly what was discovered at Aldrin Reach and why the Council reacted the way it did. Ethan Hall stepped forward, a tall man with tired eyes and steady hands, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years working through problems most people couldn't begin to understand. He activated a display behind him, showing a diagram of the technology his team had developed. 3 years ago, Ethan said, my team began exploring a method of energy generation based on principles the Council never approved for research, mainly because they believed the risks outweighed the benefits. We found a way to make it stable, efficient, safe. What we built at Aldrin Reach is not a weapon. It is a power source capable of running entire cities on a fraction of the energy currently required, and it could eventually be adapted to propulsion systems far beyond anything currently used by any Council species. The room went quiet again, this time with a different kind of stillness, the kind that came from understanding the true scale of what was being described. The Council isn't afraid of what this technology can destroy, Ethan continued. They're afraid of what it can build. If humanity develops this fully, we could close a technological gap that took other species thousands of years to establish. That kind of shift changes everything about how the galaxy is balanced. Laura watched the reactions ripple through the crowd, some faces filled with pride, others with visible worry. She understood both responses. This was not a simple choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between two very different futures, each carrying risks no one could fully predict. A representative from the Pacific Coalition stood, requesting to speak. Nathan Brooks was known across the assembly for his careful, measured approach to difficult decisions, rarely raising his voice, rarely taking sides too quickly. If we accept the Council's terms, Nathan said, we protect our current alliances. We keep access to shared defense networks that have protected Earth for over 2 centuries, but we also accept a permanent limit on what we can become. Every future generation would grow up under a ceiling placed on them by species who fear what we might achieve. And if we refuse, countered a representative from the Eastern Bloc, a sharp-eyed woman named Sophie Lang, we walk away from every safety net we've built. Since joining the Council, we would be alone, facing threats we've never had to face, without support. Is our pride worth that risk? The debate stretched on through the morning and into the afternoon, voices rising and falling as different factions argued for different paths forward. Laura listened carefully to every argument, weighing each one against the quiet fear she had carried since leaving Chorveth Station. She thought about the Council chamber, about the way the other delegates had looked at her, not with respect, but with suspicion. She thought about the resolution itself, worded not as a partnership, but as a leash. By evening, the Assembly called a recess, giving representatives time to consult with their governments before returning for a final vote. Laura found herself standing alone on a balcony overlooking the Assembly grounds, watching the sun set over a city that had no idea how close it stood to a decision that could reshape its place in the galaxy. Grace joined her a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Laura without a word. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. What do you think we should do? Grace finally asked. Laura considered the question carefully before answering. I've spent 6 years trying to build trust between us and the Council. I believed that trust was the foundation of everything we achieved together, but sitting in that chamber, watching them draft a resolution meant to hold us back out of fear, I realized something. Trust only works when both sides believe in equality. The Council never saw us as equals. They saw us as something to be managed. So you think we should refuse the terms? Grace said. I think, Laura replied slowly, that if we accept, we will spend every future generation asking permission to grow. And I don't believe that's a future our people would choose, if given the full truth of what's at stake. Grace nodded, staring out over the darkening skyline. The vote will be close. Some factions will push to accept, out of fear of losing what we've built. Others will push to refuse, out of fear of losing what we could become. Then we owe it to everyone in that chamber to be honest about both fears, Laura said. No matter which way the vote goes, it needs to be a decision this world actually chooses, not one made out of panic. When the Assembly reconvened that night, the chamber felt different, charged with a tension that had not been there earlier in the day. Grace called the session back to order, and the final debate began, shorter this time, each speaker choosing their words carefully, aware that history was listening. Daniel Cole, the head of Defense Coordination, stood to address the room, his voice steady, despite the weight of what he was about to say. I have spent my career preparing this world for threats we might one day face, without council support. I won't pretend that path is without danger, but I also won't pretend that permanent oversight is protection. It is control, dressed in the language of safety. If we accept these terms, we are not choosing security. We are choosing to stop growing out of fear of what growth might cost us. A long silence followed his words, broken only by scattered movement as representatives exchanged final glances with their advisors. Laura felt her heart pounding as Grace called for the vote, watching as each faction's decision appeared one by one on the massive display above the chamber floor. The numbers climbed slowly at first, then faster, faction after faction choosing to reject the council's proposed resolution, choosing instead to explore a path that had never been tested by any species in council history. When the final tally appeared, the chamber fell into a stunned silence that lasted for several long seconds before erupting into a mixture of applause, gasps, and quiet, uncertain murmurs. Humanity had voted, by a clear majority, to reject the council's terms entirely. Grace stood at the podium, her expression a careful balance of resolve and understanding of the weight now resting on every person in that room. The decision has been made, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber. We will not submit to permanent oversight, but rejection alone will not be enough. The council gave us an ultimatum, and simply refusing their terms will not end this confrontation. We need a response strong enough to make our position clear, immediately and without room for negotiation. Laura stepped forward, feeling the eyes of the entire chamber settle on her. She thought again about the council chamber, about the resolution glowing in cold formal script above the chamber floor, about the quiet fear in the eyes of delegates who had once called humanity a promising newcomer and now saw only a threat to be contained. There is only one response that makes our position impossible to misunderstand, Laura said slowly, feeling the full weight of the words before she spoke them. We do not simply reject their proposal. We remove ourselves entirely from their authority. We withdraw from the Galactic Council. The chamber went completely silent, the kind of silence that comes only in the moment before something irreversible begins. No one in the chamber moved for several seconds. Grace Lawson stared at Laura, searching her face for any sign of hesitation and finding none. Around the room, representatives who had spent the entire day arguing over the terms of a resolution now found themselves facing a question none of them had prepared for. Withdrawal from the Galactic Council was not a path any member species had ever chosen voluntarily. Species were expelled. Species begged for entry. No one walked away. Explain what you mean, Grace said carefully, though the tightness in her voice suggested she already understood. Laura stepped closer to the podium, her mind moving quickly now, pulling together everything she had learned in 6 years of council service. If we reject their terms and remain a member, they will find another way to force compliance. Trade restrictions, diplomatic pressure. They will keep pushing until we either submit or until the pressure becomes something worse. But if we withdraw entirely, we remove their authority over us completely. No resolution can bind a species that is no longer part of the council. No oversight can be enforced on a member that no longer exists within their system. You're talking about isolating an entire world, said Nathan Brooks, rising from his seat. Every defense agreement, every trade route, every shared resource we depend on, flows through council membership. Withdrawal doesn't just mean losing a vote. It means losing everything built on top of that vote. I understand the cost, Laura said, meeting his gaze steadily. But I would rather face that cost as a free species than accept a future where every choice we make requires someone else's approval. The chamber erupted into overlapping conversations, some voices rising in support, others in clear alarm. Grace allowed the noise to continue for a full minute before raising her hand for silence, waiting until the room settled before speaking again. This is not a decision we can make lightly, and it is not one that belongs to this assembly alone, she said. But given the timeline we've been given, we cannot afford lengthy deliberation either. I am calling for a final vote, tonight, on whether Earth formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. The vote that followed felt different from every vote that had come before it. Laura watched the numbers climb on the display above the chamber floor, faction after faction choosing withdrawal, the tally rising steadily, until it became clear that the decision was no longer close. When the final result appeared, the chamber did not erupt into celebration. Instead, a heavy, focused silence spread across the room, the kind of stillness that comes when people understand they have just chosen a path with no clear end in sight. Grace turned to Laura, her expression solemn. It's done. The decision has been made. Now we need to act before the council moves first. Within hours, Earth's communication networks were activated on a scale never used before. A single message, drafted and approved by every major faction of the global assembly, was prepared for transmission to every council world simultaneously. Laura stood in the central communication hall of the assembly building, watching technicians finalize the broadcast, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination she had never felt before in her life. Daniel Cole entered the hall just before the transmission was set to begin, his expression tense. Every embassy has been notified. Recall orders are already going out to council space. Every human vessel currently docked in council territory has been instructed to depart immediately. And the council vessels currently in our space? Laura asked. We're drafting the notice now. 72 hours to leave voluntarily. Laura nodded slowly, feeling the full weight of what was about to happen settle over her. This was not simply a diplomatic statement. This was humanity, closing a door that had been open for 3 centuries, a door that could not easily be reopened once shut. At exactly midnight, local time, the transmission began. Laura stood beside Grace as the message went out across every frequency used by the Galactic Council, a calm, clear voice reading the formal declaration that would soon reach every corner of council space. To the Galactic Council and all member species, effective immediately, the human species formally and irrevocably withdraws its membership from the Galactic Council. All shared research initiatives are terminated. All embassies are recalled. All council vessels currently within human territory are given 72 hours to depart peacefully. This decision is final and is not open to negotiation. The message repeated 3 times before falling silent, and for a long moment, no one in the communication hall spoke. Laura felt the enormity of what had just happened settle into her chest, heavy and undeniable. Humanity had just done something no species in council history had ever done before. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within hours, council communications flooded every open channel, demands for explanation, requests for emergency negotiation, warnings about the consequences of unilateral withdrawal. Laura ignored every one of them, focused instead on coordinating the recall of human personnel scattered across council space, from research stations to trade outposts, to the embassy on Chorvith Station itself. The embassy recall proved to be the most dangerous part of the entire operation. Laura received an urgent call just before dawn from Megan Turner, the deputy ambassador who had remained behind on Chorvith Station to oversee the final evacuation of embassy staff. Her voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. Laura, we have a problem. The council has locked down the docking bays. They're refusing to authorize our departure. Laura's stomach dropped. On what grounds? They're claiming procedural violations, saying withdrawal requires a formal review period before it can take effect. They're stalling us, Laura. I think they're trying to force renegotiation by holding our people here. Laura closed her eyes, forcing herself to think clearly despite the fear rising in her chest. How many people are still on the station? 43. Embassy staff, research liaisons, and their families. Get everyone to the docking bay. All of them. I'm sending backup immediately. Laura turned to Daniel, who had already anticipated the order, moving quickly toward the communication console to coordinate an emergency response. We have 2 transport vessels that can reach Chorvith Station within 6 hours, if we push their engines to maximum output, he said. But if the council has locked the docking bays, we'll need more than transport ships to get our people out. Then we send an escort, Laura said firmly, not to start a confrontation. To make it clear, we're not willing to leave our people behind. Within the hour, 2 heavily reinforced transport vessels launched from Earth's orbital dock, accompanied by 3 of the newest defense cruisers in humanity's fleet, ships equipped with early prototypes of the very technology developed at Aldrin Reach. Laura remained in constant contact with the fleet commander throughout the journey, watching the tense hours pass as the ships closed the distance toward Chorveth Station. Aboard the station itself, Megan Turner gathered the remaining human staff in the main embassy hall, watching anxiously as Council security forces stationed themselves near the docking bay entrances. The atmosphere on the station had shifted dramatically in the hours since the withdrawal announcement. Delegates from other species watching the human embassy staff, with expressions ranging from concern to open hostility. "They're not going to let us leave without a fight," said one of the younger embassy staff members, his voice shaking slightly. "We're not looking for a fight," Megan replied, though her own hands were trembling as she checked the emergency evacuation plan one final time. "We just need to hold until our people arrive." The wait stretched on for hours, each minute feeling longer than the last. Council officials made repeated attempts to enter the embassy hall, demanding immediate compliance with procedural review requirements. Each attempt met by Megan's calm but firm refusal to allow any further delay. Tension built steadily among the gathered staff, the fear of the unknown pressing heavily against the walls of the small embassy hall. Finally, station alerts began sounding across Chorveth Station, announcing the arrival of unidentified vessels entering the system. Megan rushed to the nearest viewport, watching as 3 sleek defense cruisers appeared on the edge of the station's sensor range, escorting 2 larger transport ships steadily toward the docking bays. The arrival caused immediate chaos among Council security forces, officials scrambling to respond to a situation they had clearly not anticipated. Laura's voice came through on the embassy's emergency channel, calm but urgent. "Megan, get everyone to Docking Bay 7. Our ships are requesting priority docking clearance now." Council officials attempted to block the request, citing continued procedural violations, but the sheer presence of humanity's defense cruisers positioned just beyond the station's perimeter made it clear that further delay would not be tolerated quietly. After a tense standoff lasting nearly 20 minutes, Station Control finally granted docking clearance, allowing the human transport ships to connect directly to Docking Bay 7. Megan led the evacuation personally, guiding all 43 embassy staff and family members through the station's corridors, past crowds of onlooking delegates who watched the procession in stunned silence. The walk to the docking bay felt endless, every step accompanied by the weight of uncertain eyes and the quiet fear of last-minute interference. When the final embassy staff member crossed safely onto the transport ship, Megan allowed herself a single deep breath before following them aboard, the airlock sealing shut behind her with a heavy, final sound. Within minutes, the transport ships disengaged from the station, moving swiftly toward the waiting defense cruisers, leaving Chorveth Station behind for what everyone aboard understood might be the last time any human being would ever set foot there. Back on Earth, Laura remained in the communication hall throughout the entire operation, her eyes fixed on the status updates streaming across the main display. When the confirmation finally came through, all human personnel safely evacuated, all vessels clear of Council space, she felt the tension in her shoulders release for the first time in what felt like days. Grace entered the hall quietly, watching the final status reports scroll across the screen. "It's done," she said softly. "Every embassy recalled. Every research initiative terminated. Every human vessel clear of Council territory." "And the Council vessels in our space?" Laura asked. "All departed within the 72-hour window, though not without considerable complaint through diplomatic channels that no longer technically exist." A faint, tired smile crossed Grace's face. "We did it, Laura. We actually did it." Laura stared at the final status report, feeling the full weight of what had just happened settle over her. Humanity had severed its ties with the Galactic Council, closing a door that had connected them to the wider galaxy for 3 centuries. There was no going back now, no simple path to reopening negotiations, if the decision proved to be a mistake. "What happens now?" Laura asked quietly, more to herself than to Grace. Grace considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Now, we find out exactly what kind of future we've chosen for ourselves." Outside the communication hall, the sun was rising over a world that had just made a decision, unlike any other species in galactic history. Laura stepped toward the window, watching the light spread slowly across the horizon, and wondered, with a mixture of pride and uncertainty, what the galaxy would think when it finally understood that humanity had chosen to walk alone. 3 months after the withdrawal, the first real test of humanity's decision arrived without warning, far from the safety of Earth's orbital defenses, in the outer edges of a system known as Corvin's Belt. The mining colony stationed there had been one of the last human outposts still operating near the boundary of former Council trade routes, a small but steady source of rare minerals used in advanced manufacturing. With Council protection no longer available, the colony's defense relied entirely on a single patrol cruiser and the goodwill of distance, the hope that isolation itself might offer some measure of safety. That hope ended the night. 3 unregistered vessels appeared on the colony's outer sensors, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested experienced raiders rather than random opportunists. Within the Council's old defense network, an attack like this would have triggered an automatic alert to nearby Allied fleets, a safety net built over centuries of cooperation. That network no longer existed for humanity. The colony was alone. Colony Administrator Oliver Grant received the warning just after midnight, station time, his sleep interrupted by the harsh sound of the emergency alert system. He reached the command center within minutes, finding the small night staff already scrambling to assess the threat. 3 vessels, unknown origin, weapons signatures active, reported the young defense officer at the primary console, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. They're not responding to any hailing frequency. "Get our patrol cruiser moving!" Oliver ordered, forcing his voice to remain steady, despite the fear building rapidly in his chest. "And activate the colony's shield perimeter immediately." The patrol cruiser, a single aging vessel originally designed for routine security rather than combat, moved into position as the colony's defensive shields flickered to life around the main settlement. It was not much, certainly nothing compared to the layered defense networks the Council had once provided, but it was what humanity had, and it would have to be enough. The unregistered vessels closed in quickly, their weapons systems already primed as they approached the colony's outer perimeter. Oliver watched the tactical display with a growing sense of dread, understanding all too well how outmatched the colony truly was, without any Allied support to call upon. Then, unexpectedly, one of the incoming vessels broke formation, veering sharply away from its original course. The defense officer at the console let out a small gasp of surprise. "Sir, one of the raider ships just took heavy damage. I'm reading debris and weapon discharge, but not from our position." Oliver leaned forward, watching the display closely, as a 4th vessel appeared on the sensors, moving in fast from the direction of the outer asteroid field. It took only a moment for the ship's identification signal to register on the colony's system, and when it did, Oliver felt a wave of relief wash over him. "That's a human defense cruiser," the officer said, disbelief clear in her voice. "One of the new prototype vessels." The cruiser moved with a speed and precision that far outclassed anything the raiders had anticipated, its weapons systems disabling 2 of the 3 attacking vessels within minutes, forcing the third to retreat rapidly back into the darkness of open space. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 minutes, ending as quickly as it had begun. As the tension in the command center slowly eased, Oliver opened a communication channel to the newly arrived vessel, eager to understand where such timely reinforcement had come from. The response came from a calm, steady voice belonging to the cruiser's commanding officer, Captain Alan Pierce. "Colony Administrator, this is Captain Pierce of the defense vessel Meridian. We picked up your distress signal from a relay station 3 systems away and adjusted course immediately." "Captain, I have to ask," Oliver said, still catching his breath from the tension of the encounter. "How did you arrive here so quickly?" "Corvin's Belt is well outside standard patrol range." There was a brief pause before Captain Pierce answered. Since the withdrawal, Earth's Defense Command made the decision to establish a rotating network of rapid response patrols, covering every human territory previously reliant on Council protection. "We don't have the same coverage the Council once provided, but we're building something of our own, one route at a time." Oliver felt a complicated mixture of relief and pride settle over him as he processed the captain's words. Humanity had known, from the very first moment of withdrawal, that isolation would come with real risks. But rather than accepting vulnerability as an unavoidable cost, Earth's leadership had chosen instead to build new solutions, new systems of protection, built entirely on humanity's own resources and ingenuity. News of the Corvin's Belt incident spread quickly across human territory, becoming one of the first clear examples of a pattern that would define the months following the withdrawal. Every challenge that arose in the absence of Council support was met, not with panic, but with rapid, determined adaptation. Back on Earth, Laura Mitchell followed the reports from Corvin's Belt closely, meeting with Daniel Cole and the rest of the Defense Coordination Team to review the incident in detail. The small briefing room felt different from the tense atmosphere of the withdrawal itself, filled now with a quiet sense of cautious confidence, rather than uncertainty. The new patrol network performed exactly as designed, Daniel reported, reviewing the tactical data from the encounter. Response time was slower than what the Council's old system would have provided, but well within acceptable limits given our current resources. And the raiders? Laura asked. Unregistered vessels, likely independent operators looking to exploit territory they assumed would be undefended following our withdrawal. This incident sends a clear message that assumption was incorrect. Laura nodded slowly, feeling a small measure of relief at the news, though she understood this was only the beginning of a much longer test. The galaxy was watching humanity closely now, waiting to see whether the decision to withdraw from the Council would prove to be an act of confident independence, or a reckless mistake that would eventually force humanity back to the negotiating table on far worse terms than before. Reports continued arriving over the following weeks from across former Council space, painting a picture of a galaxy adjusting slowly to humanity's absence. Trade routes that had once included human systems were quietly redrawn. Diplomatic channels that had relied on human mediation between certain rival species fell silent, leaving old tensions to simmer without the careful balance humanity had once provided. Word also reached Earth of quiet divisions forming within the Council itself, fractures between member species who viewed humanity's withdrawal in sharply different lights. Some species, including several who had long felt overshadowed by the Council's more established powers, watched humanity's bold decision with something close to admiration, privately questioning whether the Council's rigid oversight truly served the best interests of every member. Others viewed the situation with growing alarm, concerned that humanity's rapid technological progress, now completely unrestrained by Council oversight, represented an unpredictable and potentially dangerous shift in the galaxy's balance of power. Rumors began circulating of closed-door Council sessions debating how best to respond to a member species that had simply chosen to leave, a scenario the Council's founding charter had never fully anticipated. Laura received a detailed briefing on these developments from an unexpected source 3 weeks after the Corvin's Belt incident. Claire Dawson arrived at the assembly building late one evening, carrying a data cache retrieved through one of the few remaining informal contacts humanity still maintained within Council space. This came through a contact in the Velatari Research Division, Claire explained, activating the display in Laura's office. It's not official Council communication, but it gives us a clearer picture of how our withdrawal is being discussed internally. The data revealed exactly what Laura had feared and hoped for in equal measure. The Council remained deeply divided over how to respond to humanity's departure. Some delegates pushed for immediate efforts to re-establish contact, worried about the long-term consequences of losing access to human innovation and trade. Others argued strongly against any reconciliation, insisting that humanity's independence, if left unchecked, would eventually pose a serious threat to the established order the Council had maintained for millennia. "They're afraid," Laura said quietly, studying the data closely. "Not of what we've already built, but of what we might become without their oversight to slow us down." "There's something else," Claire added, pulling up an additional file. "Reports suggest they've dispatched observation vessels along the border of human territory, monitoring our activity from a distance. Nothing aggressive, at least not yet, but they're watching closely." Laura considered this information carefully, understanding the delicate position humanity now occupied. Independence had granted freedom, but it had also removed the protective structure that had shielded humanity from galactic scrutiny for 3 centuries. Every choice humanity made now would be observed, analyzed, and judged by species uncertain whether to view humanity as a promising equal or a growing threat. "We need to be careful," Laura said finally. "Not fearful, but deliberate. Every step we take from here will shape how the rest of the galaxy understands what kind of species we've chosen to become." Over the following months, Earth's leadership worked steadily to strengthen humanity's position, expanding the defense network first tested at Corvin's Belt, establishing new trade partnerships with smaller, independent species who existed outside direct council influence, and continuing research into the very technology that had triggered the crisis in the first place. Dr. Ethan Hall's team, now operating with full support and resources previously withheld out of caution, made rapid progress refining the energy system first developed at Aldrin Reach, technology that soon began transforming human infrastructure in ways that exceeded even their most optimistic early projections. Slowly, steadily, humanity adapted to its new reality, building a version of independence that felt less like isolation and more like quiet, determined growth. Yet beneath the surface of this progress, Laura remained acutely aware of the Council's watchful presence at the edges of human territory, a silent reminder that the story of humanity's withdrawal was far from finished. Late one evening, nearly 6 months after the withdrawal, Laura stood once again on the same balcony, overlooking the assembly grounds where she had first discussed the crisis with Grace Lawson. The city below had changed subtly in the months since, new construction rising steadily on the horizon, powered by technology that would have remained hidden and restricted under council oversight. Grace joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee just as she had on that first tense night. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights flicker steadily against the darkening sky. "We've made it further than I expected," Grace admitted quietly. "But I don't think this is over, not by a long way." Laura nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the horizon, thinking about the observation vessels quietly monitoring humanity from a distance, about the fractures growing steadily within the Council itself, about a galaxy still trying to understand exactly what kind of future humanity had chosen for itself. "No," she agreed softly. "I don't think it is either." A full year had passed since the withdrawal, and the silence between humanity and the Galactic Council had remained unbroken. No formal communication had crossed the boundary between human territory and Council space, no attempts at renegotiation, no further threats. Just a long, watchful quiet that stretched across the stars, broken only by the occasional sighting of distant observation vessels drifting near the edges of human systems. Laura Mitchell stood inside Earth's newest deep space monitoring station, watching a live feed from one of the outer defense platforms recently completed along the border of human territory. The station itself represented everything humanity had built in the year since the withdrawal: advanced sensor arrays powered by the energy systems first developed at Aldrin Reach, defense capabilities that had grown steadily stronger with each passing month, and a network of alliances with smaller independent species eager to trade and cooperate outside the rigid structure of council oversight. It had not been an easy year. There had been setbacks, difficult negotiations with new trade partners unfamiliar with human customs, occasional skirmishes with independent raiders testing the strength of humanity's new defenses, and the constant underlying tension of not knowing when, or if, the Council might decide to act on the growing concerns whispered through its divided chambers. But through every challenge, humanity had adapted, building something entirely its own, shaped by its own choices, rather than the limitations once imposed by an outside authority. Daniel Cole entered the monitoring station with a datapad in hand, his expression carrying a mixture of curiosity and cautious alertness that immediately drew Laura's attention. "We've detected something unusual," he said, activating the main display to show a detailed sensor reading from the station's outer perimeter. A single unregistered vessel, moving slowly along the border, matching known Council design specifications. It's been holding position for nearly 6 hours. Laura studied the sensor data closely, recognizing immediately the careful, deliberate movement pattern of a scout vessel, rather than anything resembling an aggressive approach. "They're not trying to hide," she observed. "This feels intentional." "Should we intercept?" Daniel asked. Laura considered the question carefully, weighing the risks of confrontation against the value of understanding exactly what the Council was attempting to learn about humanity's current state. "No," she finally said. "Let them observe. We have nothing to hide, and perhaps it's time they understood exactly what kind of future we've built, without their oversight." Over the following days, additional scout vessels appeared along different sections of human territory, each one maintaining careful distance, while gathering what Laura assumed were detailed observations of humanity's infrastructure, defense capabilities, and technological progress. Reports flowed in steadily from monitoring stations across human space, each confirming the same pattern of cautious, deliberate observation, rather than any sign of aggression. 3 weeks after the first scout vessel appeared, Laura received an unexpected communication request, routed through one of the few remaining neutral relay stations still operating between human and Council territory. The message came not from the Council itself, but from an individual delegate, someone Laura recognized immediately, despite the year of silence between them. The message was brief, requesting a private, informal meeting between Laura and the Velatari delegate, who had once challenged her so openly during that first tense session in the Chorvith Council chamber. The request specified a neutral location, a small trading outpost operated by an independent species, with no formal allegiance to either humanity or the Council, a place carefully chosen to avoid any appearance of official negotiation. Laura brought the request to Grace Lawson immediately, uncertain how to interpret the sudden outreach after such a long period of silence. It could be a trap, Daniel warned during the emergency briefing called to discuss the situation. An attempt to lure you away from Earth's protection, for reasons we can't yet understand. It could also be exactly what it appears to be, Grace countered thoughtfully. An individual delegate seeking informal contact outside official Council channels, perhaps hoping to understand our current position without the pressure of a formal diplomatic setting. Laura weighed the risks carefully before making her decision. "I'll go," she said finally. But not alone, and not without proper precautions. 2 weeks later, Laura arrived at the neutral trading outpost aboard a small, unmarked transport vessel, accompanied by a discreet security detail, positioned to monitor the situation without drawing unwanted attention. The outpost itself was a modest structure, home to a small trading community, representing several independent species who had chosen to remain outside both Council and human political influence. The Velatari delegate, whose name Laura had learned over the years was Henry Voss, though few outside close diplomatic circles ever used the Velatari's chosen human-style name, waited for her in a private meeting room near the outpost's central market. He looked different than Laura remembered. The confident authority he had carried during that first tense Council session, replaced by something more cautious, more uncertain. "Ambassador Mitchell," he greeted her formally, though his tone carried none of the coldness she remembered from their last meeting. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I wasn't sure what to expect after a year of silence," Laura admitted, taking a seat across from him. Henry considered his words carefully before speaking. "The Council has spent the past year deeply divided over how to respond to your withdrawal. Some believe we should attempt to re-establish contact, concerned about the long-term consequences of losing access to human cooperation. Others believe your independence represents a growing threat that must eventually be addressed, one way or another." "And which side do you fall on?" Laura asked directly. Henry paused for a long moment before answering. "I was among those who supported the original oversight proposal. I believed, at the time, that humanity's rapid growth represented a genuine risk to galactic stability. I have spent the past year watching what your species has built without our involvement, and I find myself questioning whether that belief was ever truly about safety, or whether it was simply about fear of losing our position as the more established power." Laura studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception in his admission, finding instead what appeared to be genuine, if reluctant, honesty. "What changed your perspective?" "Your defense network along Corvin's belt neutralized a raiding threat faster than most established Council patrols could have managed. Your new trade agreements with independent species have created stability in regions the Council has struggled to influence for decades. Your technological progress, which we once viewed as reckless ambition, has instead produced advancements that have benefited every species you've chosen to trade with." Henry paused, meeting her eyes directly. "You did not become a threat in our absence, Ambassador Mitchell. You became something we failed to imagine you could be. An equal." Laura felt the weight of his words settle over her, understanding the significance of what he was admitting, not as an official Council position, but as a genuine, personal shift in perspective from someone who had once viewed her species with open suspicion. "What does this mean for the future?" Laura asked. "Are you suggesting the Council intends to reach out formally?" Henry shook his head slowly. Not yet, and perhaps not for some time. The divisions within the council remain significant, and there are still many who view your independence as a problem requiring a solution. But I wanted you to understand that not every voice within the council sees your withdrawal as a mistake, or your species as a threat. Some of us are beginning to wonder whether the path you chose might eventually prove wiser than the one we tried to force upon you. The meeting continued for nearly an hour, Laura and Henry discussing the changes that had unfolded across both human and council space over the past year, each sharing careful, measured insights into how their respective societies had adapted to the new reality created by humanity's withdrawal. By the time the conversation concluded, Laura found herself leaving with a cautious sense of hope, understanding that the rigid, fearful position the council had once held was beginning to shift, slowly and unevenly, but shifting nonetheless. As Laura's transport ship departed the trading outpost, beginning the journey back toward Earth, she reflected on everything that had unfolded since that first tense summons to the Chorveth Council chamber, over a year earlier. Humanity had faced a choice between submission and independence, between accepting limitations imposed out of fear, or embracing the uncertain risks of building something entirely its own. The path chosen had not been easy, and the challenges were far from over, but humanity had proven, through resilience, innovation, and determined adaptation, that independence did not have to mean isolation, and that walking away from an unfair arrangement did not have to mean walking away from progress. Back on Earth, Laura arrived at the assembly building just as the sun was setting, the familiar warm light spreading across the city she had watched grow steadily stronger throughout the past year. Grace met her at the entrance, eager to hear the details of the meeting. "How did it go?" Grace asked, as they walked together toward the main council chamber. "Better than I expected," Laura admitted. "The council remains divided, and there's no guarantee that division will resolve in our favor. But there are voices within their ranks beginning to question whether the fear that drove their original proposal was ever truly justified." Grace considered this news carefully as they entered the chamber, where the full global assembly had gathered for the evening session, eager for an update on Laura's unofficial meeting with the Velatari delegate. Laura stood at the podium, looking out over the faces of leaders and representatives who had, 1 year earlier, made the difficult and uncertain choice to walk away from the safety net that had protected humanity for 3 centuries. 1 year ago, Laura began, her voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber, we made a decision that no other species in council history had ever chosen. We walked away from an arrangement that offered protection at the cost of our own growth, choosing instead to build our future on our own terms, accepting whatever risks came with that choice. She paused, looking around the chamber at the faces that had grown steadily more confident throughout the challenges of the past year. That choice has not been without difficulty. We have faced threats without the safety net we once relied upon. We have built new alliances, developed new technology, and adapted to a galaxy that watched our departure with a mixture of doubt and quiet curiosity. But through every challenge we have proven something important, not just to the Council, but to ourselves. Independence, chosen freely and pursued with determination, can build something far stronger than protection, offered through fear and control. The chamber remained silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of her words, before slowly rising into steady, resolute applause, a response far different from the uncertain tension that had filled this same room exactly 1 year earlier. Laura looked out over the gathered leaders, feeling a quiet sense of pride settle over her, understanding that whatever challenges still lay ahead, humanity had proven itself capable of facing an uncertain future on its own terms. The Galactic Council remained divided, still uncertain how to categorize a species that had chosen to leave rather than submit, still watching cautiously from the edges of human territory, unsure whether they were witnessing the beginning of a dangerous new rival, or the emergence of an equal they had once been too afraid to recognize. Outside the assembly building, the stars had begun to emerge across the darkening sky, distant points of light representing a galaxy still trying to understand exactly what kind of future humanity had chosen for itself. Laura stepped out onto the same balcony where this entire journey had begun, watching those distant stars with a steady, quiet confidence she had not felt in a long time. Whatever the galaxy decided to make of humanity's choice, one truth had already been proven beyond doubt. Humanity had faced an impossible decision, and rather than shrinking beneath the weight of fear and control, it had chosen to stand on its own, building a future defined not by what others allowed it to become, but by what it chose, deliberately and courageously, to build for itself. The silence between humanity and the Galactic Council remained unresolved, a quiet, uncertain space, stretching across the void between two very different visions of the future. But for the first time since the withdrawal began, that silence no longer felt like fear. It felt like the calm, steady confidence of a species finally standing exactly where it had chosen to stand, ready to meet whatever the galaxy decided to bring next.